Welcome. This is my first making video of my jacket construction series. It is complete from cutting to finishing. What you will need is a jacket pattern, which I have a guide for already. If this is the first video of mine you're seeing, then I suggest you going to my channel and looking for the Start Here playlist. I've made videos for my interpretation of each stage of making a bespoke jacket. The playlist is in the description and on my channel. Enjoy. Always start with checking over and ironing the fabric thoroughly. It'll mitigate any unwanted shrinking later, and if it gets discolored by heat and steam, pre-doing that means at least we'll have a consistent fabric. Check for a pile, whether the weave only goes one way. You can spin a coin onto fabric, and if it consistently goes a specific direction down the cloth, that's the direction of the pile. More useful though if you already know it has a pile. Check for any stains that we might want to avoid. We can just highlight them and work around them. With the selvage towards you, start with the front piece, close to you on the top right. Measure the grain line from the selvage, making sure it's parallel and that you have 2.5 centimeters from the top and front. Lay weights onto it and trace it out, plus balance points, buttons and pockets. So make sure you get the front pitch, which I emphasized when drafting, but if you look back you can find it in the same way straight on the cloth. I'll say again, using a piece of sharper chalk is best, and to chalk, don't apply too much pressure. Applying too much pressure will create thicker, less precise lines. You could also move the fabric doing that, changing where the chalk is in the first place. Plus, it'll wear out the chalk more quickly. We also need to trace the darts and pockets off. You could make holes in the pattern and sort of colour them in with the chalk, or hold your ruler there and move the pattern out of the way, or use your fingertips and you can feel through where it is. On the shoulder neckline, front side and back, you need to apply 2.5 centimeters of inlay, an inch. At the hem you need to give it an extra 5 centimeters. Those don't require a lot of the thinky box, it's quite simple. When we add the inlay across the neck, we can practically follow the break line up to the shoulder inlay, so that there isn't any extra cloth beyond the break line. That would be folded back. It can be intersected by the 2.5 centimeters on the top of the lapel, just in a corner. At the armhole there needs to be 1.5 centimeters of inlay at the top of both of them, and the front inlay goes back to 0 at the front pitch, and the back at the top of the dart. This is something that we'll be able to use if we lose the front pitch mark stitch for applying the sleeves later. We can't have any extra cloth at the base of the sleeve though, basically. On the fold of the fabric, up at the right, you have some space that you can use to make the collar. Like I said, it's not cut by the cutter, so for now we'll mark a rectangle about 15 centimeters tall and 38 centimeters long. Below that there's space for the facing for the inside of the jacket, which we will cut having prepared the front of the jacket later. For now we can use the jacket pattern to indicate us the height and width that we need. Only a few extra centimeters between the top of the shoulder and the hem, so we can place it below the collar and mark a little bit below the hem. There's also space for fitting up pieces like welts, bearers and flaps. On account of saving them for later, mark the grain, if only out of habit. Cut it out all nice and easy, folding away the remainder for later. The back pattern is below the bottom of the front, a minimum of 2 centimeters below it. Make sure it's straight to the grain again. Mark the balance points on the side seam only. We don't really need it on the back because we don't separate the back. The back pitch being very important for applying the sleeve, and that's about halfway down the armhole. For the hem, we need 5 centimeters of inlay at the bottom again. On the back, we need about 2 centimeters of inlay all the way up, and there needs to be 2 centimeters of inlay around the neck, but not the shoulder. We absolutely need these inlays because there's no seam allowance on those. On the back of the armhole, we need some inlay that starts around 1.5 centimeters out from the shoulder and taper that back to the pitch. Again, the pitch is important for the sleeve, so tapering the inlay gives us a second indication for the pitch if we lose it later. The pattern suddenly changes here. I had to correct the pattern to remake the pattern drafting video, but don't worry about it. On the center back at the bottom, we need 5 centimeters of total inlay. It only needs to be about 23 centimeters high plus a bit extra. Mark the point that you want to be the top of the vent. The rule I use is as high as the back of the front pocket, so they'll be at the same height when it's all put together. Find the straight grain and place the 2 front points of the sleeve on it. I'm chalking a line at right angles to the selvage, then chalking a line right angles to that. You're tracing around the whole of the top sleeve, plus there's an extra 5 centimeters beyond the cuff and 5 centimeters of inlay for the surgeon cuff on the hind arm seam, moving around 15 centimeters plus some inlay above the pattern's cuff for the aforementioned surgeon cuff. You may not use all of it, but it's usually easier to come off than to put on. You can find the grain of the undersleeve measuring from the tips again. For the grain of the undersleeve, I did the same as the top sleeve. I can see the facing is there, so I don't want to encroach on it though. It's usually most efficient to flip the undersleeve, but only if the fabric is the same upside down. So if there's no one-way pattern and no pile. Being sure that there's space for an extra 5 centimeters beyond the cuff. There needs to be an extra 2 centimeters of inlay on the back side of the sleeve all the way up, then 1.5 centimeters above the top of the armhole, and then 2.5 centimeters at the top of the armhole tapering to nothing at the base, staying at nothing to the end. For the surgeon cuff, from the bottom of your pattern there should be a total of 5 centimeters of inlay, about 15 centimeters up the arm, but at your behest. We can cut out all the pieces, and as we cut it, make sure the selvage is properly aligned with itself. The 2 halves of the cloth are flat together, and mark on the grain as we cut pieces away. Like I said when cutting out trousers, if you're on an island table, you can move around and cut without contorting yourselves. Well, free yoga, but still. I don't do it right now, but we can snip into the cloth a small amount to mark things like the front and back pitches and balance points. I think later I literally only snip the front pitch into both pieces though. It's easy to see from above, but when you're down here cutting, you need to keep in mind which lines you're supposed to be cutting along. Specifically when the cloth juts out for vents and surgeon cuffs, which we don't want to cut off. The same principles of laying out cloth apply to the lining. On top of this though, fastening the two layers with pins will help as we apply cloth on top of it. We are working with the selvage edge of the lining again. On the forepart, we need to mark about where the facing is going to be. So about 4 centimeters from the front of the shoulder and about 10 to 12 centimeters from the button. It's best when the line of the facing doesn't go further than the pocket, which will help a lot when applying the facing. I mean, bespoke, but for now, curve those two together, and then it goes straight down from there. You can move some of the front over the lining, save the environment and stuff. Chalk the hem flush with the hem of the forepart that we chalked on first, or a centimeter below it is probably better. Give the lining an extra 2.5 centimeters on top of the shoulder inlay, all the way around the armhole and down the side seam. From the shoulder, we can just cut it straight across to the selvage. We are trimming the excess later off after we cut the facing. Chalk on the important parts of the darts as well. The dart line isn't as important as the top and bottom and widest point of the dart. You don't really need to copy the exact width either. Line the back of your back piece a few centimeters from the folded edge of the lining. The vent inlay might hang off if your lining is a bit narrower or your front part is a bit wider, but it'll be fine. Usually we want some extra lining at the back, but the fold in line with the vent is good. Mark the hem of the lining flush with the chalk mark of the back hem, or 1 centimeter below it, just whatever you did for the front piece. Copy off the neck inlay, give the lining an extra 2.5 centimeters along the shoulder. On the lining, mark the neckline and center back down to the vent, marking on the vent. From about 10 centimeters below the neckline, chalk away from the center back line and then follow about the inlay of the back fabric, rejoining the center back drawn on the lining at about the waistline or just a little bit above it. This will become a center back pleat. At the top of the armhole, give the lining an extra 1.5 centimeters and taper that to 0.5 centimeter at the bottom of the armhole, and taper that to 0 at the waist. Then copy it down to the hem. Cut it out around the chalk on the shoulder, neck and hem, but we can leave the center back and the fold intact for now. This is quite easy to see from my point of view, even though it's practically invisible on camera. For the top sleeve, the sleeve lining is usually different, but whatever you can get your paws on. Often I think something even smoother, since it's the only real place there's a lot of movement, so I think an ermazine is even better. If it's striped, make sure it's on the straight grain. Like we did on the back and the front, copy the cuff flush along the chalk. However, you could give it a centimeter beyond, that would be ideal. Chalk flush with the forearm seam. And at the top of it, I'm striking the lining so that I can see where the top of the main fabric is. Give yourself an extra 2 centimeters around the crown of the sleeve. Copy off the surgeon cuff as well, and the top sleeve lining doesn't need the extra cloth, but you may like to mark where the top of the cuff is. When I cut the hindarm seam, it is going to be continuous, it doesn't need the extra inlay, and I'm snipping into the lining at the top of the main fabric so that I can line up the front and back when I make the sleeves. Again with the grain, again flush at the chalk on the cuff, or an extra centimeter again is ideal. Chalk flush with the inlay and on the forearm seam. Again, at the top of the forearm seam, I'm chalking on where the top of the cloth is so that I can line them up more accurately later. Around the armhole, give it 2 centimeters from the chalk, not the inlay, so it'll curve closer to the inlay of the sleeve. I'm also tracing around the surgeon cuff this time. It's very important that we do have the cuff inlay on the undersleeve. After cutting it out, you need to copy the chalk from the mark stitching onto the inside of the lining. I had forgotten to snip into the cut I made denoting the top of the cloth, but I do it in a minute. Flatten, steam and shrink the canvas before working on it. We'll start with the body canvas, though the usual advice is to leave it overnight in a bucket of water and then let it dry, but I certainly don't have time for that. Line the front onto the straight grain of the canvas 2.5 centimeters from the front edge, and check there's 2.5 centimeters above the tippy tip point. Chalk flush with the inlay, mark 2.5 centimeters beyond the front inlay, and mark 2.5 centimeters extra on top of the inlay above the neckline, shoulder and armhole, and beyond the base of said armhole, so above and beyond the top of the dart. Mark on the middle of the pocket, then from there make about an S-shaped curve to the armhole, then a straight line down to the hem. Mark the break line and breakpoint onto the canvas. Mark the front dart line and then the top of the dart onto the canvas. We only need those 2 pieces of information. You may like to measure the canvas at its widest point so that you know that you can get the other piece of body canvas out of the body canvas. Cut the first piece out. Lay your first piece onto the rest of the canvas, a little bit maybe sticking off the canvas, but that'll be fine. Just cut the other piece around it. You can lose a bit of the inlay we gave on the front, but we'll need some of it. Transfer the chalk markings onto the second piece as well. Chalk them onto both sides of both. With the chest canvas, we absolutely should cut away the bits beyond the selvage. They're almost always hard and pointy, and we really don't want them to be part of our jacket. Best cut them away in a sterile way, far away from where we're working, so that it doesn't get caught at all. Mark 12 centimeters below the top of the dart. Take the trimmed selvage edge of the chest canvas and lay it up to the side seam side of the body canvas, ideally so that it's slightly beyond the furthest point of the shoulder, but at least the furthest point at the bottom of the armhole. With the bottom of the canvas lined up to the 12 centimeter point we marked on the dart. Mark the break line onto the chest canvas and follow the line all the way to the top of the body canvas. We need 2 pieces of the same amount of canvas, so place the first piece up against the same diagonal line and cut it again, with the grain still matching, by the way. On the body canvas, chalk out a line 1 centimeter beyond the current break line. Trust, we'll align the chest canvas to that and the 12 centimeter point on the dart. Cut around the chest canvas so that it's flush with the body canvas. Halfway along the shoulder we need to mark a 9 centimeter perpendicular line to the shoulder into the canvas and cut down that line. On the break line, make sure the top of the canvas is sitting above the break point by at least 2.5 centimeters. If it's not, start a line 2.5 centimeters above the break point on the canvas and curve it down to the point on the dart, and then curve from that point on the dart up to the side seam to a little below the armhole. I do this quite arbitrarily once I put it on the Domette though. There's no particular grain to Domette, just lay the chest canvas onto some doubled up Domette and cut all the way around it, giving yourself an extra 2.5 centimeters all the way around. Approximately. We can keep these for later. Place everything together and the body canvas usually on the outside and we can roll it up. This is the point that I cut the mark into my undersleeve lining. That's my facing and other small scraps that I'll be able to make use of for things like welts. Tying it up with some of the selvage.